Dungeons and Dragons, the world's most popular tabletop role-playing game. And you don't get that title for nothing. It's so recognizable that it's referenced in shows like Voltron, Stranger Things, Dexter's Lab, and frickin' Recess, just to name a few. And with popular live play shows like Dimension 20, Critical Role, and a full-length movie, and let's not mention the first time, shall we? D&D has surged from moderate popularity to major popularity. Everyone knows about Dungeons and Dragons. Everyone in the late 2010s was raving about their latest edition, myself included. I loved this system. I loved playing D&D, and I loved running D&D even more. And when the dreaded 2020 hit with its pandemic, well, hobbies like D&D really helped people get through those times. Yes, the D&D hype train really swept up the world, and rightfully so. 5th edition D&D is arguably one of the most accessible versions of D&D out there. But I'm not here to talk about how great Dungeons & Dragons is. I'm actually here to point out its flaws. I mean, you saw the title of the video. You know what this is going to be about. Now, hold on, wait a minute, before you click away. Just stick around and hear me out for a second, okay? I'm not one of those, play something else, or D&D is so bad, play Pathfinder instead. I simply want to take a moment to just point out the things about D&D that made me fall out of love with it, and into the strong arms of an Italian game instead. Stick with me. I'll reveal what that game is soon enough. Okay, so what made me have a fallout with D&D? Well, for starters, a big chunk of it was because of their company Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. The OGL fiasco, use of AI art and writing, not to mention the massive layoffs despite how profitable D&D was to the company. And up until recently, a lot of notable writers of the current system seem to be jumping ship, and I can't help but wonder why. It really started to leave a sour taste in my mouth. But I know the exact moment I decided to stop running D&D, or at the very least, stop running officially licensed D&D material. Picture this. You're a D&D fan, right? And you've been really dissatisfied with recent book releases for the system. Strixhaven was a bust when it should have been the perfect setting. Candlekeep was fine, but overall not too interesting, and Fizzbands was middling at best, despite being about dragons. You need something to reignite that spark. Something like Theros or Eberron. Then, WotC announces that they're going to be releasing a Spelljammer setting. A setting that hasn't gotten a re-release in years. One that could fix the ship combat in vanilla D&D, potential for new spells and classes. They even teased new races. So, you go ahead and you look up all you can for Spelljammer. You learn that a lot of the lore and concepts were written by an old school anime fan, and it shows. Elves that use living armor, undead giant bugs used as mecha, lore and realms as far as the eye can see. You dream of the potential for a modern Spelljammer setting. And then the day comes. The book is released. You go to your local hobby shop and pick up your copy, and you're delighted to find out that it's a box set. You get home, you get comfy in your favorite chair with a cup of coffee, you break out the first book, and nothing. And you think, yeah, that can't be right. Spelljammer is rich with lore. How does it have nothing in it? No new spells, no new classes, barely any items, and none of them interesting. There's a few cool ships, but despite this setting having everything to do with these ships, these Spelljammers, there's really no new rules for ship-to-ship combat. In fact, the book recommends that you just smash the ships together and have normal combat instead. Desperately, you check the next book in the set. But outside of some interesting new races to play, they come with minimal lore. Even a list of new monsters and enemies to fight is subpar at best. Somehow, they managed to make space clowns and vampirates less interesting than how they sound. But you hold out hope. Surely the built-in adventure in this setting has something interesting. This can't possibly be... It's somehow worse than Strixhaven. The most last-minute, thrown-together piece of garbage you have ever read. Somehow, despite everything, WotC had taken their most interesting and oldest setting, a setting that has been around since Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, first edition Dungeons & Dragons, and gave their players literally nothing to do with it. It was an insult. And it was pretty much the nail in the coffin for me. If you follow me on TikTok, you've noticed that after my review of Spelljammer, I shift focus from D&D and started talking about other systems. But I will admit, D&D left a void in my life that was very hard to fill. Up until that moment, I lived and breathed D&D. And while systems like Dungeon World, Fantasy Age, and Morkborg got close, nothing really sparked that same creative fire that D&D once gave me. That was until one fateful day in 2023. A couple of years ago. I was working at a local game shop at the time, and I had asked my players if they had any recommendations for game systems they wanted to try. One such player suggested a game called Fabula Ultima, and showed me a picture of the game's cover. Now, at first, I thought the art was AI. After careful study, I realized it was in fact legitimate artwork. A beautiful cover that just oozed one concept: adventure. Now, they say never judge a book by its cover. In this case, quite literally. But let me tell you, dear viewer, this was love at first sight. Somehow, this cover had lit the fuse in me that D&D had left cold. First, I got my hands on their free trial adventure module called Press Start. It was through this I learned that Fabula Ultima used a custom system that was made to emulate the feeling of JRPGs, Japanese role-playing games for those of you who like to get mansplained to. And boy, did it deliver on that. Easy, fast-paced combat, unique pre-made character sheets, a wonderful and easy-to-understand roleplay system. I had gotten a taste, and I needed more. I needed to know everything about this game so I could run a campaign for myself. I felt that spark return. The void of D&D was being replaced by a passion project from Italy. Now, before I delve into what makes this TTJRPG great, let me just take a chance to talk about the things I don't like about D&D and explain how Fabula Ultima does it a little bit better. Starting first with leveling and multiclassing. Now, a few years back, just after mass quarantine, I had talked to a fellow game master like myself who said that D&D had the illusion of customization, which at the time I very much disagreed with. Of course D&D had customization. You can pick everything from your class to your weapons and even the spells if you picked a caster of some kind. And it becomes even more customizable when you add the multiclassing optional rule. Then you get combos like Barbarian Rogue and Fighter Monk. And let's not forget the absolutely broken class combo of the Sorcerer Warlock. However, looking back, I realized just how wrong I was. So let's talk about multiclassing. So there's a reason why, even after the update, multiclassing is still considered an optional rule. Well, that's because 5e was not designed with multiclassing in mind. It's very clear that based on how the rules are written, that multiclassing in D&D is just kind of thrown in at the last minute. The only complex rule about multiclassing is that you need to have some stats at 13 for specific classes that you want to spec into. And you only get a set amount of spells depending on that class combo. Multiclassing is fine, don't get me wrong. I've even dabbled in it myself, my favorite combo being the Barbarian Rogue. But for some reason, despite multiclassing being an optional rule in D&D, it's treated like a staple mechanic of the game for players all around. A hot topic discussion online within the community is what two combos are more optimal than others. There's entire videos titled "Break Your DM's Game with These Ridiculous Class Combos" or "How to Make Your DM Cry." Videos like these are more often than not centered around the concept of making broken characters, or rather, how to frustrate your GM's plans for metaphorical combat encounters. And I find these videos rather mean-spirited towards GMs, like the GM was someone to defeat or outsmart rather than to work with in collaborative storytelling. Stuff like this got so ridiculous that I, as a GM, had to put a soft lock on multiclassing. Instead of outright banning at my table, I instead had a prerequisite that the players had to have an in-story reason to multiclass rather than just flat out letting them do it. And when I talked about this on my TikTok a few years back, I got damn near crucified. Pretty much every time I hear the words multiclassing, I get a little shiver of anxiety up my spine. So, you can imagine my reaction when I found out Fabula Ultima does multiclassing as well. When I saw that Fabula Ultima not just has multiclassing, but requires it in order to make a character, I damn near gave up the book entirely. D&D had ruined the concept for me, and I wasn't going to go through the stress of countering it again. But, despite my initial concerns, I read on. I read the rules on how making a character works in this game. It was then I discovered something. Since Fabula Ultima was built around multiclassing instead of it being an afterthought like it was in D&D, the builds and combinations that you could do actually had a sense of balance and cohesion, and not to mention unique qualities. So, how it works in Fabula is that all players start at level 5 with 5 skill levels. That player must then allocate those skill levels into the classes they pick. A player can have up to 3 classes picked, but no less than 2. For example, I have 5 skill levels. I can put 2 skill levels into Sharpshooter and then 3 levels into Wayfinder. But if I wanted to, I could instead take 2 levels in Sharpshooter, 2 levels of Wayfinder, and give my party a little more support by taking a level in Spiritualist and add some healing stuff. What I can't do in this game, however, is take all 5 of those skill levels and put them all into Sharpshooter. See what I mean? Making characters like this in Fabula made me realize just how linear leveling up in D&D actually is, even with multiclassing. In D&D, as your character levels up, you gain certain abilities and skill as you level up based on the subclasses that you pick. Sure, you can get some customization with the subclasses that you pick and the spells that you get, but that's kind of it. If you have 2 rogues in the party, sure, one can make daggers with their mind, the other one can steal stuff really good, but both of them are still going to rely on sneak attack in combat. No matter what these 2 players do to differentiate themselves from each other, at their core, they're both just playing a rogue. They're both going to mechanically play the same. With Fabula, you can pick whatever skills you want at any time during character creation and level up. Every class in Fabula has a list of abilities. With the skill levels you allocate to the particular class, you can gain any of the skills of your choice at any time. So remember those 2 levels we put into Sharpshooter? Well, let's put a skill level into Barrage to be able to hit more than one enemy, and Warning Shot so we can apply negative status effects to those enemies. Then, with those 2 levels in Wayfinder, we can put them both into the Fateful Companion skill and get ourselves a strong animal buddy to fight with us. And then, with our last level in Spiritist, we can take Spiritual Magic skill so we can get our hands on a healing spell. Now, I know I more or less just made a ranger in D&D, but that's just one example of the kind of builds that you can make in this game. You can make a heroic armored knight who uses 2 tower shield-sized gauntlets as weapons, using his fury to dish out damage and defend his allies, all while singing a battle hymn to boost his allies' stats. How about a mysterious ninja who steals not just coins, but valuable intel from the enemies in the middle of combat to give themselves an advantage, all while using jujitsu to create elemental magic and cast some devastating attacks? What about a warrior who wields dangerous, volatile, dark magic, harming himself, but with it is able to not only deal damage, but to rewrite time and reality itself, opening a vortex gate that can teleport themselves and allies to any location that they've previously been? And all of these examples aren't just later level builds, hopes and dreams of reaching level 20. No. This is just level 5. True character customization, complete control over what your character can do right at the start of the game. Never again will you have to worry about 2 players picking Barbarian or Cleric. Everyone can be whatever they want to make to fit their playstyle. And that's just the start of the game. Now, let's cycle back and go ahead and talk about the monsters and NPCs in D&D that you can throw at your players. First things first, D&D has an absolute menagerie of colorful and unique monsters and creatures to throw at your players. From the memorable owlbear to the headache that is known as the Beholder, D&D has so many monsters, in fact, that they need an entire dedicated book just to talk about all of them. But does the quantity of monsters affect the quality of the encounter? Let's take a second to talk about the most confusing part of a monster stat block, the challenge rating, or CR. So, how CR is supposed to work is that it's supposed to be the value that indicates the average capabilities of that monster. In order for the fight to be challenging or fair, you have to compare the challenge rating of the monster to the average level of a party of 4. CR is supposed to be a quick reference to show if the party is going to be able to handle that monster. Except no, it doesn't! Let's take the Imp for example. This is my favorite monster to bring up when it comes to this discussion. So the Imp in D&D is a CR1 monster, with 10 hit points and an AC of 13 and a flying speed of 40 feet. Now, if you're a new game master, you'd think that this is the perfect monster to throw at your level 1 players. After all, the CR of the Imp matches the average level of the players. However, The Imp has a couple of other handy abilities that make it so difficult to beat for a starting party. First, Imps have a resistance to all non-magical damage. That means even if the Barbarian with a Greatsword manages to roll max damage on the thing, it's probably not going to kill it in one hit. Unless they rolled like a god with their stats. Second, they have immunity to fire, which is the most common damage type when it comes to early magic spells, so half the wizard's spellbook doesn't quite work on the damn thing. And then, let's not forget its tail attack. Yeah, it only does a d4 of piercing damage, but if anyone has an unlucky roll against the con save of its attack, they take an additional 3d6 poison damage, which, if you roll high on at least 2 of those d6s, early players are going to get dropped quick. And then, on top of all of that, the little fucker can turn invisible, giving any attack against it disadvantage, making this little bastard even harder to kill than it already is. Now, I'm not trying to say that imps are impossible to beat for early level players, and a group of level 3 adventurers can easily handle an imp no problem. But the fact that the CR is 1 means that level 1 players should be able to handle this thing easily, given how CR is supposed to work. And yet imps could potentially cause an accidental TPK if you're not careful. And imps aren't even the biggest offender when it comes to the CR imbalance. A Pentadrone is a CR2 creature. A bunch of level 2 players should be able to handle this thing, right? Wrong! Because the fucker has an AC of 16 with 32 hit points and a multi-attack of 5. That means 5 separate attacks coming at your Barbarian all at once. And let's not forget that it can expel a gas from its body that can paralyze players. So, to sum up, that's 5 attacks going at your Barbarian who failed the con save and is now paralyzed. And so that's 5 attacks, each one of them with advantage, and if any of them hit, that's an automatic crit. For the sake of journalistic integrity, I got access to the new monster manual with the updated rule sets and mechanics. And the Imp did in fact get some stat adjustments. For starters, the Imp now has 12 hit points instead of 10, and lost its resistance to non-magical damage. Its Sting also got an adjustment, making its basic attack do a d6 plus 3 damage, and then an additional 2d6 if the player fails the con save. So that player is still potentially getting 3d6 worth of damage, plus a guaranteed 3 damage from the Sting, so I'll leave that up to you if that's better or not. Oh, and it can still turn invisible. Look, I know I kind of went on a tangent on this, all to frame my point that I think CR is bullshit and you should just read the damn stat block instead of just assuming your players can fight the thing. But this whole thing kind of pulled me away from my original point, which is there is no easy way to make your own monster in D&D. I know, what the hell? Why the hell did I go off on imps for like 6 minutes and we're just going to talk about monster customization? Trust me, it will all come together in the end, just stick with me. Making your own monster in D&D is a fucking nightmare. First things first, you can't just make a monster stat block confidently. You just can't. There is no step-by-step guide on how to make a balanced monster to fight in D&D. There are some references in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but outside of that, you're better off just taking the stat block of an already existing enemy and making micro-adjustments to its HP and damage output and type. For the most part, D&D has no way of making yourself a wholly unique monster for your players to fight.
Well, that's just not true. People make homebrew monsters all the time.
Oh, hey, Brooke. This wasn't supposed to be a collab, although I appreciate the artwork. Where's the script?
I've seen some people make some really complex and unique monsters on their own that don't break the game and sometimes add interesting and new rules.
Well, yes, there are some very memorable homebrew monsters out there. Hell, a really popular homebrew monster is something called a false Hydra.
Yeah, so you can't say that there isn't a way to make your own monsters in D&D. That's just incorrect.
Okay, yeah, there are some examples of homebrew throwing my argument in the proverbial shredder, but we can't sit here and say all homebrew monsters are as balanced and well thought out as the false Hydra. Most homebrew monsters that are made, published or otherwise, more often than not fall in either the overpowered or underpowered side. Yeah, sometimes you strike gold and finally a truly balanced monster for your campaign, but more often than not, you're gonna probably settle for something that's close to what you're looking for and adjust it for your needs. And let's not forget metagaming.
Oh yeah, I hate metagaming.
Seriously, why are you here?
As the editor of this video, it's my duty to make sure that you provide a fair and balanced argument. Also, I'm the stand-in for the audience.
What audience? This is the first video I've made in 8 years! So, while the subject of metagaming is something that really needs its own video, I'll try not to delve too much into the subject. God, this video is probably long enough as it is. Let's take a look at this stamp. Ooh, that is looking long. Appreciate you sticking around for as long as you have. Anyway, I personally don't really have a hard stance on the subject of metagaming, but the one subject of metagaming that I let slide for the most part is players' knowledge when it comes to monsters. If you're playing D&D for the better part of 6 years like me, you're going to get familiar with the monsters in this game. And you're going to use that knowledge when you're taking on combat in D&D. It's just going to happen. My point in all this hemming and hawing is that it's hard to come up with an original NPC for D&D that is balanced and engaging for your players. It's tough to make your big bad evil guy truly your own creation. Now, Fabula Ultima, on the other hand, has a solution for this exact issue that I have. On page 319 of the Fabula Ultima Player's Handbook, there is a list of little unique monsters and NPCs you can use on your players. However, this list only goes on for a measly 10 pages, with a couple of extra pages introducing potential bad guys to throw at your players. When I first saw this, I was kind of upset that there wasn't a larger list. Given how thick this book is, I was expecting a massive catalog. But if you go back to 302 in the book, you'll find the real meat and potatoes of this system. Fabula Ultima has a step-by-step guide on how to make your own NPCs for the game. The step-by-step chart covers what kind of creature the NPC is, what benefits the chosen species has. Then you choose their level. It's usually recommended that the enemy you make is the same, if not a little higher than the party's current level. Then the stats. Then the abilities you can give it based on its level. You can get new abilities and stat boosts per level. Oh, and if you give the NPC a weakness, then you gain another ability or upgrade that you can put onto that NPC. Basically, you can tailor-make each monster of Fabula Ultima. In fact, the process of making an NPC for Fabula isn't much different than making a player character. I've used this chart to create really challenging foes for my players. Enemies that will always give my players a run for their money, but always give my players an excuse to use every resource they have to be able to win the battle.
Alright, so the video was done, and then Need Games decided to launch their Kickstarter for their Bestiary Volume 1, which at time of recording, and hopefully when this video is uploaded, is still going, with hopefully a link in the description, with Ben remembering to put that in there. So, yeah, if the lack of pre-made stat blocks was something that was keeping you away from trying this, no more. Problem solved. Enjoy.
And now, I suppose this is the perfect time to talk about the next subject of this long critique of the world's most popular tabletop role-playing game. Combat. So, quick history lesson. D&D, before it was D&D, was actually a supplement rule set for a tabletop wargame called Chainmail. Now, wargames are things like Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Jesus, a little Warhammer. The whole point of wargames is that you build an army of little mini fellas and make them fight each other. D&D was a supplement of the wargame Chainmail, which would allow players to make one adventurer instead of a whole army of them, and then they would team up with other adventurers, other players, to delve into dungeons and to gather up loot and treasure. It was all very bare bones, but that's how D&D got started. After that, Gary Gygax made a standalone game called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and the rest is history. But D&D never really lost its wargaming roots, did it? Now, I, for one, really like the combat in D&D. There's a lot of strategy in the game, planning out how your character will face the challenges, using their abilities to gain the upper hand, and helping your allies get the leg up on the battle as well. And if you have a map and minis, even better! Now you can measure and get the exact placement of your minis on the field and really get a feel for the battle that can only be had in D&D. See, the combat in D&D really highlights those wargame roots, but D&D combat only truly shines when you have a map and minis in front of you. Sure, you can play it with theater of the mind. Nothing stopping you from that. And it's still fun when you do. But D&D combat is only ever truly engaging when there's a map, dice, terrain, and minis to really get your mind in the fight. There's reasons why shows like Dimension 20 and Critical Role make a big show of the combat, creating memorable sets for battles to take place. But not everyone has access to this kind of stuff, if at all. Sometimes, hell, most of the time, theater of the mind is the only option. And even if you do have all the sets and terrain, combat in D&D takes forever. D&D combat takes way too long when you play it in person. For shows like Dimension 20 and Critical Role, they have entire 2 to 4 hour long episodes dedicated to combat alone. And let me tell you something. Watching D&D combat is boring. Sometimes even combat in person can be boring if the DM is just kind of running it, not really making a big show of it. And as a DM who likes to make a big show of combat myself, doing that for 4 hours straight is exhausting. There are so many rules to combat. Actions, bonus actions, reactions. What connotates a reaction? What actions can be combined with bonus actions? What's the range of the spell? Does the spell cause thunder or force damage? Because the bad guy is immune to thunder damage. Can I swing my sword? Not until the wizard picks the exact location and spell, only for them to realize they didn't fucking prep that spell and have to hold their action all together after waiting 10 minutes for them to find the exact placement of the character on the map. God! It's almost like Theater of the Mind streamlines this process altogether. But I'm rambling. Look, I know I sound like I'm complaining, and I kinda am. But D&D really shows its wargame origins with how its combat functions. Now Fabula Ultima, on the other hand, has its combat feeling like a completely different game genre altogether. Remember when I said Fabula was based off of JRPGs? Well, that baseline really shines in its combat. In Fabula Ultima, it's turn-based, like any other TTRPG. But I'm talking classic turn-based combat. You get one action. And with that one, you get a list of actions that you can take that you gotta pick from. These actions can vary from casting a spell and swinging a sword, to guarding against an attack or investigating your enemy for weak spots. And making attack rolls is really easy too. Players only have 4 stats: might, dexterity, insight, and willpower. And those stats are assigned a specific die at character creation. For example, remember that ranger we made? Well, let's say she has a D10 in her dex and a D8 in her willpower and insight. And finally, she has a D6 in might. And our ranger can't be a ranger if she doesn't have a short bow. Now, let's say this ranger is facing a giant rat. So to hit with her bow, she needs to roll dex. And then her damage is HR plus 8 physical damage. Now, dex means that she has to roll her dexterity die twice and combine the results. So, like in D&D, players and enemies have an armor class called a defense stat. The rat's defense is 12, so the ranger needs to roll her dex die twice and try to roll higher than a 12 to hit the rat. Okay, so she rolled an 8 on her first D10 and a 6 on her second, making her total a 14. So she lands a hit. Now to calculate the damage. Well, remember the HR plus 8 thing on her bow stat? HR means high roll, which means you take the die that rolled the highest result. So we take the die that rolled an 8, and then we add the plus 8, making it 16 physical damage. And that's how you calculate the damage for the normal attack. One roll, that's all it takes. You see, combat in Fabula cuts the middleman when it comes to rolling to hit and damage. In fact, when prepping for combat, the book recommends that combat take no longer than 4 rounds unless the players are fighting against the big bad evil guy, the final boss. Players and GMs need only to roll once to see if they hit and to see how much damage they can do. And that's just attacking. Spells and abilities can boost normal attacks to do even more damage, or change the kind of damage that you do. Oh, and what's even better is that you don't even need to worry about the range in the system. Unlike in D&D, where you need to make sure that you're even close enough to hit the enemy, in Fabula, you're always in range. But then what's the point of weapon variation? I can hear a couple of you snootier viewers typing in the comments. If the sword and the bow always hits the enemy regardless, what's stopping me from using a bow instead of my awesome Masamune katana that was forged in the hills of the Night Moon on the dark eve of my christening? Okay. Well, while yes, range doesn't quite matter in this game as much as it does in D&D, unless you're fighting an enemy that's flying, of course, your class does. Certain classes just pair better with certain weapons. The Fury class really benefits from brawler and dagger type weapons, while a weapon master shines with blunt and bladed weapons. Understanding the class's skills help you decide the kind of weapon you need to combine with those skills. once again adding to the customization of your character. And it's stuff like this that really highlights the JRPG origins of Fabula Ultima. The feeling of creating a great build that plays off of the unique weapon of your character. Hell, this game even lets you make your own custom weapons to really play off your class combo, with the GM's discretion, of course. And what's really great about this game's combat is that it's so streamlined that combat encounters really only last 15 to 20 minutes. 30 at most. No more planning entire sessions around basic enemies of the game. No more fighting over the wording of a specific spell or skill. Combat in Fabula is fast, punchy, and in some cases, pretty brutal. You can down players really easily in this game. But you don't have to worry about TPKs here in Fabula Ultima. And let me tell you why. Player, character, death. It's never fun. Sure, it can be narratively impactful for your party, really up the stakes of your stories, maybe build a good revenge plot, but nothing sinks your heart faster than watching the last failing death save kill your character. A character that you've spent months playing, building up their story, maybe even making artwork of them, only to have them die just before the finish line of the campaign. Hell, it's even worse if you're only a couple of sessions in, or maybe smack dab in the middle of it. Now, unlike with most things about D&D, I'm actually a strong advocate for player death in TTRPGs. It really gets the heart pumping in your players. And if they manage to avoid character death with a well-placed healing spell or a successful death save, the sigh of relief is palpable. But then, there are some times when the DM's dice thirsts for blood. TPKs. Total party kill. At best, it's an accident, and at worst, it's the DM being a dick, taking away player agency for the sake of their story. No DM worth their salt should plan for a TPK without consulting the players first. And if it happens by accident, and the DM rolls 6 nat 20s on the table, well, that's it. Campaign's done. The story has concluded, and you died to goblins in your first encounter. Woohoo! Player character death sucks. But TPKs are so much worse. Nothing kills the mood for new players faster than a TPK at the start of the campaign. Sure, you can hand wave it, laugh it all off, and start again, but that's not always going to happen. But Fabula Ultima has a fix for this. Let's go check on our ranger again. So far, she hasn't been able to land a single hit after the last successful one, and the giant rat just rolled a crit and dropped her to 0 hit points. Well, she gets to choose 2 options. She could surrender or sacrifice. If a player chooses to surrender, they are simply removed from the encounter until the battle is done. Maybe the GM imposes a debuff after the encounter is concluded. And when the battle is done, the player gets back up with half their total hit points and humbled. If the whole party hits 0 hit points and surrenders, then a significant debuff could come into play, like the party gets captured or separated. Maybe their items get looted. Maybe they could even lose the trust of the townsfolk they were trying to help. If for some reason the ranger was to sacrifice, let's say was against the big bad of the campaign and she was the last to hit 0 hit points, choosing sacrifice would kill the player character, flat out. But when a player willingly sacrifice, that player gets to describe how they sacrifice themselves to save the party and how it turns the battle in the party's favor. Maybe Ranger uses the last of her strength to cast one final massive healing spell that not only heals the party to full capacity, but it also doubles their HP total. Or maybe she fires one last arrow at the villain, striking or exposing a vital weak point that, when targeted, doubles the amount of damage done to that villain. The important thing about sacrifice is that it allows the player to decide just how vital their sacrifice was. It adds a layer of importance and lets the player decide the ending of their character. Player agency is such an important factor when it comes to Fabula Ultima, and that's why I saved the most important mechanic for this game for last. Fabula points. Fabula points are basically a special tool that lets players re-roll on important rolls if they want. Kind of like inspiration points in D&D. But re-rolls aren't the only thing they can do. Fabula points can be used to push the story in a narrative direction that the players want to go down. It's basically a resource that allows players to create an overarching story with the GM. They can alter the story or add to it, or forge a bond with NPCs or player characters to help enhance their roles with them or against them. Some class skills are required to spend Fabula points in order to use them. For D&D, the Dungeon Master's Guide introduces an optional rule that's kind of like this called narrative points that allows players to influence the story kind of like this. But like multiclassing, narrative points was a concept thrown in as an afterthought. Fabula points, on the other hand, are built into the game as a core mechanic. I know stuff like this can be a bit of a turnoff for some DMs. I know for me, it was a mechanic I was actually planning on ignoring altogether when I first read about it. Lots of DMs out there aren't too keen on allowing players to mess with their carefully prepared session and campaign. Why should I allow my players to mess with my story? I can hear some of you saying. And I even asked that myself. Well, for starters, you're not writing a damn book here, fellas. The great thing about TTRPGs, in general, is that they are collaborative storytelling experiences. You and the players make the story. It's up to you, the GM, to create the bones of the campaign and to keep the players on track. But together, you and your players make a story. And Fabula points help encourage players to participate in that storytelling. Why is that, you ask? Because in order to level up quickly in Fabula Ultima, the players need to spend those points. The points are all collected at the end of every session. And if you have enough, plus a few extra points given out by the DM, you get to level up at the end of the day. But what's to stop my players from using a Fabula point to have a very broken character moment, or to rewrite my entire story? Another question I asked myself. Well, to put it simply, you are the GM. You still get final say on what happens. Even if the player wants to spend the point, you could just say no and let them use it for something else in return. I found that by including Fabula points, it encourages the players to really participate in the story, to listen to the beats and the twists, to pay attention to every word. Because if they hear something interesting, they can use a Fabula point to be part of that world-building experience. It encapsulates the true experience of collaborative storytelling better than any other system I've ever read. Look, honestly, I could go on for hours about how great Fabula Ultima is, but this video is long enough. I haven't even talked about the bonus rules from other supplement books. Rules like quirks really help add to making unique characters in Fabula. There's official rules in this game that can literally let you play as 3 kobolds in a trench coat. Custom weapon rules, crafting and building rules, ship-to-ship combat rules, as well as how to make your own ship. Not to mention all the bonus classes outside of just the player's handbook. The Gourmet lets you make food to buff your allies. The Symbolist lets you use paint to create magic. A Pilot class that lets you have a mecha. And again, I'm not trying to shit on D&D. I mean, while I was writing the script for this video essay, I got a chance to run D&D one-shot for a group of veteran players, and I had a blast. But at the same time, D&D has its flaws, and it's important to recognize its shortcomings. While yes, Dungeons & Dragons is the most recognizable tabletop role-playing game in the world, Fabula Ultima won Game of the Year back in 2023, and a few other awards as well. And that's nothing to sneeze at either. I don't throw around the word perfect very often. In my 30-plus years of living, I only ever managed to consider one thing perfect, that being Elden Ring. And even now, I still hesitate to call Fabula perfect. It still has its flaws. It's a world-building paradise, but it can easily scare off new players when they see just how thick this book is. But Fabula Ultima is clearly a passion project that deserves just as much recognition as D&D does, in my opinion. And hopefully, I got at least one more person to give this system a shot. I'll put a link to their website down below so you can check it out for yourself. Or at the very least, give their free module Press Start a try. I don't know how to end this video, so I'll end it with a simple thank you for watching. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.